Starfield is one of the buggiest space games I've ever seen. I mean, there are bugs everywhere. Just look at them everywhere you go. And some are massive bugs. Lots and lots of bugs. Starfield also has a ton of issues with religion and spacefaring humans on the brink of starvation, out on the edges of some far-flung solar system that should have just been called Nope for all the good in the future that it promised to give you. It's like everybody in the system said, I bet something bad happened over there. Let's go there. Space travel's dangerous, and making a ramshackle home on the edge of a crater seems like doubling down on red simply because it hasn't come up in a bit. Starfield also has a bunch of problems that you solve by flying around in your space mystery van. Space gangs, pirates, interstellar thieves, missing people, and heartless criminal space organizations bent on ruling the world like a futuristic cobra. Starfield from Bethesda comes out very soon. Subscribe because you know you want to join me. The game opens up sort of poorly, to be honest. A starting that has you as a miner hanging out with other dusters in the center of a rock somewhere, picking apart other rocks, teaching you the basic systems until something goes wrong. This is easily the slowest and long-tail way that I've ever seen a Bethesda game open. If I said it makes sense, would that explain it all? No, but that's all you're going to get due to spoilers. At first questionable and later answering questions, let's just say that Starfield's opening is more important than it lets on and less impactful than the game probably deserves. And with all Bethesda games, you deserve a good character creator, and you get one here, jumping in, choosing from backgrounds, most of which actually have narrative and many times gameplay impacts. Then you also align traits for your captain, picking a couple. So if you wanted to create a belter from the show The Expanse, you could choose Spaced, so your body is acclimatized for 0G, and Space Travel, as well as Wanted, which ups your damage when hurt, and also has you consistently followed by trailing mercenaries coming for your head. Now, skills are unlocked as you level up, and many are also tied to challenges, meaning to raise a level in something, you may need to take down a particular number of enemy ships or scan a particular number of planets. It's not great shakes, but it works well to keep you engaged in some pieces of content so that you end up getting a new skill, and it also ties into the narrative there that the more you do, the more you know. Now, soon it has you blasting off, joining a small organization of other hunters seeking out mysterious signals in the known systems, flying around, taking out bad guys who were probably just there because of a Fiverr job where they were told to protect a mysterious out-of-the-way base. Major quests are given from the groups that you join as well as in the cities, main and small alike. Just depends on what you take on, what you explore, and the random generation that you get. Most quests also have a couple different ways to finish them or complete them, sometimes entirely narratively or with theft or violence. Sweet, sweet violence. When you finally get that ship, you are off to the races. While a starter ship that isn't bad, it does let you jump from system to system, for instance, scan planets, solve mysteries, and further, you will want to end up finding another ship or just upgrading the one you have. Flying is as easy as searching out a star on a galaxy map and setting a path to it. If it's too far for your engines, you may have to star hop from one to the other. All stuff that we've seen in other space games. Planets, moons, stars, and then you can choose to scan them, finding out what minerals one or each of them may have, as well as deciding if you want to land either in designated spots or wherever else that there pretty much isn't water. But one of the biggest surprises here is that the combat is so worthwhile, you're probably going to want to experience it a lot. Regardless of the weapon or the enemy type, and it's not perfect, there's still a bit of a stick up their butt kind of main character animation we get from Bethesda, it's actually quick and tactile. The first time you power through a bunch of pissy guardian robots all bent on seeing if they can assimilate you by disassembling you first is awesome. You can clamber up edges now, and it works very well, using different jump packs to get angles on enemies they don't expect, or watching them jet into the air above to do just the same to you. The combat feels very responsive, though it's not necessarily doom eternal. Every weapon and armor also has upgrade slots for mods, each one of them with their own name and their own requirements, meaning that you can make your own legendary drop technically if you want to ignore one of the ones you get. And the game does give you a lot of loot. It feels very good in its generation, but it lets you mold your own Merca Mayhem regardless if you take the weapons that have already been created or randomly generated by the system or ones that you mod and make yourself. Be aware, you can't command your AI party to pretty much do anything. They meander around well enough, though, shooting what they can and trying to get in deep when the enemies get thick. It works well for the most part, and even on the higher difficulty, they didn't die out like red shirts in a Star Trek episode. I really can't shout out the combat enough, especially in the confines of a space game, even if you just go in with blades. It feels much better than something like No Man's Sky or others. Starfield shows it has discrete blocks of gameplay, which I'll talk about in a second. They didn't neglect this part, and it is for the game's benefit. Now, flying your ship is the same way. It's easy to use. There's systems within systems, choosing levels for your projectile lasers and other weapons against your shield, grav, jump ability, and engines, with each ship having its own power output depending on your reactor and the engine that you have installed, letting you balance in combat if you need with a button or a flick of the digital pad to choose which one. And when you dive in close, you can lock onto enemies to take out their engines, which lets you dock with them and board them. And it's always this dance to keep them alive and not dying, but also not able to kill you as you sneak up onto them and then dock. Then you work your way through the ship, taking each enemy out shot at a time. You can also register that vehicle as your own, which costs a percentage of the total worth to clear its history and make sure that it's no longer, regretfully, stolen or lodged as that. And that's one of the ways that they keep the overall economy in some kind of balance. And speaking of balance, at some point you're going to want to balance out your experience by building your own spaceship. It's time to build them space wagons. Big, small, fat, thin. You can do all of this. Shipbuilding is awesome. It's super easy to upgrade parts that the shop may have. Otherwise, you can just jump in, build, tear apart, and slam together pieces like Lego, each having its own mass and possibly power draw. There are restrictions, and the game alerts you to them when it comes to, let's say, the landing bay not being connected to the cockpit. What's great here is almost anything you can imagine can be built, at least somewhat to scale. But the best part is there are just so many options for the same ship. Let me give you an example. You can jump in, grab the same ship, and just switch around parts, making it look nothing like it did before, which changes the interior, alters its makeup. It's fantastic. I spent hours in it easily just adding and subtracting and moving parts from just a single ship that I stole. Outposts are the same way. They're built somewhat the way that we've seen in past games like Fallout 4, with you throwing down outpost markers and then using resources to make power, storage, connections, buildings, and even cosmetic parts. And yes, you can merge the output of one base to the input of another base in a different system or in the same system, depending on the upgrades that you have. It's not always intuitive, though, and sometimes thinking that you need to build something can end up requiring you to jump over there to verify that you have all of the requirements. Overall, I would have liked a easier to see and understand inventory system for that. Each can then be outfitted with a crew that you can hire, or even the main characters if you don't assign one to your ship. Because everyone you hire has their own bonuses and skills, it may make sense to throw someone you hire into the ship and instead take someone who's normally a main character in the story and put them on an outpost for a while. The mixing and matching is incredible here. Are there 1,000 planets? Yeah, probably. Can you go to most of them? Yeah. Can you set up bases on most of them? Yeah. Would you want to?
Wow! That's his disagreement squeak.
You see, some are generally useless for resource collection just because of what you may already have, a bland, textured, boring planet with very little to offer your space coffers. However, if you're a pirate, blasting away the goods, stealing the expensive, and running from the well-armed, then having your own base on an out-of-the-way place with less space traffic and outfitted with defensive weapons can be a perfect and actually usable plan, and is something that does feel different depending on where you put a base. A back-end Mos Eisley set around or behind some red giant and hidden in the shadows can end up paying off tremendously depending on what kind of work you're taking on. Speaking of work, you can take on the main and the side quests. You can also join factions as well as just freeboot it. And most of them have their own bounty boards with random missions placed down all over the known systems. Sometimes hunt down a mercenary in an abandoned radar station, other times asking you to risk arrest by sneaking in experimental medicines or alien life to a planet that has a firm no risks allowed law-abiding citizenry. And as you join these groups, you may find ship parts that are specific to that faction available for you in unique shipyards. And a lot of this doesn't sound particularly unique. Space games can triumph in a number of ways, but the true requirement is just understanding its focus. Is it the frenzied pursuit of enemies? Is their ship's shield collapse like a rusted Faraday cage before they leave a zone? Or is it about the exploration, or about the combat, or the feeling of emotion a pilot can feel the first time they step on a mainline planet as a star rise slowly goes up above them, and realizing I'm the only inhabitant, the planet is basically mine, and a random star is now my sun. Where Starfield does well is that you don't need to know exhaust rates or non-Euclidean geometry. The game offers information over the top of gameplay, letting you sink into it in a deeper way if you want, or in many times and ways, just ignore it. But I do wish it was a bit more seamless. For example, jumping into the inventory or figuring out how to drop things when you're trading with a partner instead of having to just leap out and then open that inventory again. It's also something that we've seen when it comes to the planet exploration and the big deal which comes in the term of restrictions. While it is actually vast, and no matter where you land, the game tries to put something interesting there, like broken down bases, strange wrecks, pirate battles, or otherwise, Each of those created spots do have a specific size limit. If you get to the edge, you can jump into the ship and land a little bit farther off. It's almost like a loading screen. Does it bother me? No. Is it there? Yes. Lastly, let's talk about the quests and the writing. I was surprised to find that the main quest was actually interesting. Overall, for me, Bethesda games haven't really grabbed me with their story, but instead caused me to gravitate towards making my own path with the main plot as this bookend for my actions and experiences. The same is true here. However, I did find the mystery presented in Starfield worth exploring. Side missions and city missions, and even some of the randomly created ones worked well enough because of Bethesda's excellent set dressings and environmental world building that they put in here, and I'll discuss that in a second. However, one point, organizationally, I can say that Starfield is not as seamless as I would have liked. They give you the ability to fast travel to any location, including other star systems, without going to your ship if you've been there many times. And the idea is sound, but it does hold back a feeling of that cinema, the feeling of actually flying around in your spaceship. That is a quibble because you can choose to do so if you want to. But I think a lot of people will end up defaulting to that for a lot of their travel, especially back and forth to different places. And it's always awesome to see your ship take off and land, so it's a bit of a missed opportunity. But regardless of that opportunity lost, there's something unique going on in Starfield. For example, where the X Games series of games have their space monopolies, top-hatted space tycoons, balancing economies across stars, No Man's Sky has its massive seamless travel and exploratory playground of 64 crayon box-colored worlds. Starfield has Bethesda. Now, that may sound like circular logic, but despite some issues, you find yourself working through them exactly as you have in their past titles. To find one more battle, steal one more ship, or just explore a new system and mine it for resources. To find one more cave complex and go down into the bottom of it and see if maybe there's a survivor or perhaps some gold. Starfield's gameplay loop of fly, fight, and foundation building is solid, if a bit wonky to switch between. What is not wonky, though, is the presentation. Graphically, the game can look amazing. Cresting over the edge of some fertile planet and watching the sunrise is awesome. Gun battles, their effects, space, the trash collector around your ship, that's all incredible, as are a lot of the battles. And walking through thickly populated cities or some mysterious station you find hidden behind a mountain, your suspicion level peaking high as you slowly pick the door to get in. Well, occasionally you'll look at a planet and say, this really isn't for me. For the most part, they all look awesome. What is a little bit different are the characters. Let me describe this. There's basically 3 levels of character detail for the NPC. You have your main NPCs. These are the quest givers, main NPCs that you deal with in the game, and store owners. Then you have bandits, quests, and so forth, and basic NPCs. But then you also have the citizenry along the other parts of all of the cities, and sometimes just living inside of bases, and they are by far the worst looking many times. I mean, some look really terrible. But I think for a level of detail scale and how they did it, it makes sense that way, especially if they want to keep performance high, which they did. Now, what impresses me that Starfield carves out this look and idea that they call NASA punk, and it's a thing, and regardless of the weapons or the armor, every single item in the game looks unique. Analog in a digital world, the sense of needing something to work versus needing something to look good, whether it's some rare gun that pounds down enemies or some spoilery stuff later on. There is some phenomenal design here, and it's Bethesda's incredible environmental work that also shines. Even when at times the location isn't on the best looking planet, it's the habitats that almost always look incredible, lived in, dirty, seamy, like someone said, hey, let's build a lab on a moon, and someone else probably said, but they did it anyway. And then after eating the last raspberry, they all left, and that's what you end up finding. It's the lived in feel that Beth nailed. They also nailed the scary parts. I didn't expect to say this in a review. I didn't expect to see this in Starfield. But as you continue to explore and introduce to a number and a different manner of aliens, there are some downright creepy moments. This was surprising to me. Lights flickering in and out as you explore some research facility on the ass end of a backward planet trying to move forward through a quest, and it's incredibly tense. I noticed a couple mines that appeared a little bit samey after my hours of exploration, but it's nothing different than we haven't seen in a lot of other space games. One place where Starfield hit the mark was performance. Well above 60 at 4K native Ultra on the 4090 with 80s and above depending on using FSR2 or not. And you run into a low detail texture more than once, but 1080 Ti's and up are going to see performance that's a good deal higher than I actually expected in this game. DLSS is missing so far, and cities can take a hit if you have the population setting up, but since it looks like a lot of inbreeding was going there with the citizenry, I would say you could probably turn that down and not really have a negative. Also, the game has an issue with hardware recording options. Something that seems to have been noticed during the trailers the game released, there was a little bit of a stutter in a lot of those trailers. In-game, with the current i7 and 4090, most importantly, the newest NVIDIA driver, by the way, which gained 5 to 10 FPS all by itself, it actually is very steady. The console is also incredibly steady, and perhaps we can hold out for a possible unlocked FPS setting in the future. While the game has a number of graphical settings on PC, I can tell you ambient occlusion, indirect lighting, and shadows can be turned down, set down from Ultra to get some FPS back without really sacrificing any kind of polish. It can actually be quite difficult to even see that setting in the adjustment, but getting 3 to 4 FPS back is well worth it. One problem I did run into a number of times was going into places where the game's fog and lighting systems resulted in some seriously flat lighting and foggy looks to everything. Now, this is an artistic decision, and it's not unknown for Bethesda to have some color filtering going on. For example, we have a lot of mods that remove those. I support it as an artistic design, but it looks like a major city with 100% air hazard warning sometimes. It looks like a fine layer of emphysema is just rusted onto everything, like an apartment you rent from someone who smoked and the walls were painted white, but still have that dusky yellow look. I admit I fought with the proper lighting settings for quite a while to sort of try to get it right. You may even notice some of that in the footage. Now, when it comes to bugs for performance, I had a couple minor ones, a couple stuck NPCs, and that's it. The time creating it, the delays in releasing it, obviously smoothed over the experiences that we all remember from their prior titles. It's not absent of problems. It's just that the number in my playthrough was dramatically smaller than many other open world games, and certainly infinitesimally smaller than their prior games. Let's talk about the audio presentation, though. First up is music, and this is easily my favorite soundtrack of the year, bar none. At some points, 2001: A Space Odyssey. At other points, Skyrim, filtered through some kind of tilted future filter. And even more times, when the game's incredible understanding of the themes that made Star Wars so epic, it is absolutely a masterpiece. Almost dropping to silence, then a harp or xylophone comes in. It makes the soundtrack just feel iconic and classic. Especially true of the almost hypnotic silences, and then horns kick in and it fades back to a harp and strings playing behind it like the stars in the sky traveling behind a moon. The best soundtracks are additive, pieces that resonate with the player and the locations, form-fitting like they're needed in the same way a helmet is in deep space. Honestly, that's a soundtrack here. Also, sound work. It's impressive. It just keeps getting better. It's a step up from anything Bethesda has done, especially the poor sound samples we've seen in some of their special edition versions of Skyrim. First, the actual final mix is well thought out and filters in effects depending on the environment, helmets, lack of atmosphere on a planet, and so forth. The dull thump of a gun on one moon turns into a damn slow-motion chainsaw on a desert planet. But it's the distant effects that deserve very high praise. Far-off blasts from enemies fighting it out in a deserted laboratory can be heard floating across the hilltops in a confusing array of low-end thumps. And then when you crest over the high-end spectrum starts up, the laser burning, the smaller calibers, and they mix in seamlessly back into the actual total frequency range, no longer getting absorbed. Phenomenal sound work. Also, when landing an engine, that whine of the thrusters as they get close to the ground is just captivating. I could listen to that on repeat. Or when you boost away from the planet, that bang on low thunder that then collapses and builds and collapses again, and then there's this sharp-edged crack as it starts to fly away. Awesome. When it comes to the voices, listen, while the writing for many of the characters just didn't engage me, I can't say they weren't interesting in some way, but I did find the major party members to be a bit hit and miss, with a couple having unique backstories or mini missions I found interesting, and others turned out to just feel like portable carry bags, where I offloaded my stuff with a passing, "Oh yeah, thanks for carrying this." When it comes to their voice delivery work, it's fine, but it is something that you should sort of expect from Bethesda. It's their kind of lines, their kind of delivery. Sometimes it's a little bit generic when it comes to the line because they want to fit so many different options that you may have for a quest or a specific moment that you have in a game. There's one or two characters I absolutely love, but unfortunately, there's no way I'm going to show them because they are very much spoilers. But there are some cool characters here. There's also a couple duds. But is the game a dud? Let's talk about fun factor. The most fascinating part, the most intriguing takeaway that I have from Starfield is that somehow Bethesda's made a space game interesting continually. Despite constant upgrades, new locations, most space games begin to feel a bit like a form of digital drudgery, like somehow you're a bit of that fantastical character that you're playing, a miner getting tired of cutting up rocks. It happens with a lot of games. Starfield held my attention, not just through the review period, but even now, and due in no small part to the customization. The idea that no matter what template of ship I buy, I can rip it apart in seconds and piece it back together pretty much any way I want. It's an astonishing way to make you feel like you are a ship captain. While each part is more disconnected than I would like, I find myself always wanting to explore, to fight it out, or go down one path in one of the huge cities, by the way, to see if I missed a quest, or just sit back and listen to some NPCs bitch about dates, or construct stuff, resource stuff, do all kinds of different research in your basement facility, which has you making pharmaceuticals, weapons mods, armor mods, researching new items and projects. It's a true sandbox experience, and it has its problems and its technical limits, but does the most with what it has and somehow offers an experience well above expectations. Let me explain this. 30 hours. That's how many hours I've been playing after beating. And I'm a reviewer who usually has to move on to the next thing. Where Starfield shines is that despite those flaws, and it has some, they fade away, and it plays to its strengths, which are different than I actually expected. It turns every single hill into a climate discovery, every single abandoned lab into a place that I want to go to and see if there's somebody hiding inside there to either shoot, talk to, or trade with. And for that reason, I can genuinely say this game is absolutely worth buying. The odds of Starfield coming out over a decade of creation, many games in between, up against luminaries like No Man's Sky that released like a dim, far-off shine compared to what it is now, were sort of poor. The game is great. It's different than I think a lot of other games in these kind of titles are, which makes sense, as No Man's Sky isn't the same as Star Citizen, and that's not the same as Elite, which isn't the same as the X series. If you curated 5 works of art from 5 artists, all with the main subject of space, you might get a poem, a carving, a story, a painting, and a digital picture. The same can be said of space games. And despite all the talk, and despite the idea that this has taken so many years, I sit back and look at Starfield, as it's on right now in the background, and think to myself, I'm going to be playing this a long time. And there's something about Bethesda games, some magic that they're able to create, something that they're able to do that makes me want to continue to return to them, despite any little issues I may have. And Starfield is absolutely that as well. Subscribe if you like the video. Peace out.
Something's out there. Oh, what the heck? Watch my back!
You're free to use our equipment. Just leave it in working order, okay? I wasn't expecting to see anyone else out here. I'm glad you stopped by.